Hi everybody, Adam here. So I hope you're having a great day. It is a very hot one over here in London. We're in the middle of a heat wave, so I hope that everyone is staying safe out there. Hope that everyone is staying hydrated. I am a little bit sweaty myself, as you can probably tell. Anyway, the topic that I wanted to talk about today is a kind of interesting one. It is the topic of how do you actually be motivated? How do you actually enjoy working out? And of course, this is a very challenging topic because the answer is not going to be the same for every person. This is going to be something that's very individualized. And so at the end of the day, while I can give you, okay, this is what has tended to work for me in the past, this is what has tended to work for a lot of my clients in the past, there's never a one-size-fits-all solution. Oftentimes it's about tweaking, it's about experimenting, it is about finding out what works best for you. And that's not an easy answer. It's not easy to say, hey, you've just got to try a lot of things and find out what works for you. That's not the answer that most people want to hear. They want to hear the magic bullet. And of course, there really isn't one at the end of the day. Of course, I am someone who has been coaching people for about a decade now. I have been lifting myself for about 14 years. And so as a result, I have, I would say, a little bit more perspective on the topic of motivation than a lot of other people. So as always, do not forget to smash that like button so that we can level up the channel, and I will get started. So an important thing to understand, first of all, is that there is this difference between what we call intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So a highly intrinsically motivated person is a person who just really likes the activity itself. They don't really need a ton of external motivation. They don't really need all those added external factors to make them enjoy working out. They just enjoy working out. And then on the other end, of course, is the extrinsic motivation, which means that it is coming from the outside. It is coming down to other factors like social pressure, like, basically, for example, having friends who are helping you get to the gym, like just sort of caring a lot more about the results of the workouts, how you look, etc., as opposed to just actually enjoying the workouts themselves. And that can be a problem because when you're highly extrinsically motivated, what can happen, of course, is that then those factors can change. Maybe, for example, you had a friend who was helping you get to the gym, and then it turns out that that friend has fallen off themselves, or maybe they've moved, or maybe, just some other thing has happened that has gotten in the way, and that means that that change is going to then impact you as well. And the reality is that most people are not going to be purely one or the other. I talked a lot in the past about how a lot of the people that we think of as very highly intrinsically motivated people are often actually just very extrinsically motivated people. So for example, you take an elite athlete, you'd think that they're a very intrinsically motivated person. They just really like the sport, they care about it, etc. But the reality could also simply be that that person just turns out they've got really great genetics for that sport. That's how they make money. They have coaching. They have all kinds of stimuli in place to ensure that they will keep working out, because otherwise the alternative is simply that they're not going to be able to continue earning the amount of money that they do. And as a result, they are going to put everything that they can into working out simply because that's essentially their job and because that motivation is there. And this also depends a lot based on just kind of how much money is involved in a particular sport. When you talk about a sport like basketball, then, there's a lot of extrinsic motivation. There's a lot of other factors because there's a lot of money in that sport. When you talk about a sport like bodybuilding or powerlifting, where there's not necessarily a ton of money in it, and it's something that people do more as a passion than as a career, then yes, of course, you're going to find people who are likely a bit more intrinsically motivated than extrinsically motivated. I myself am not a good example of someone who needs a lot of motivation. I'm highly intrinsically motivated, and that's just because I just really like working out. I got into working out when I was dealing with depression and anxiety issues as a teenager. I just absolutely fell in love with it, and it became such an important, crucial part of my life that it's basically never been more than maybe a few weeks at a time that I've taken off in the last 14 years. And even then, in those cases, it was mostly just when I was forced to. It was maybe something like a major move, or getting really sick, or an injury, or things like that that really forced me to take time off. And even then, it would be something where, get a few weeks into taking time off, and I would just be like, oh, come on, I'm so bored. I just want to get back in the gym. Because to me, working out is just really fun. I just really enjoy it. It is, to me, kind of the closest to being able to be like a character in a video game. You get to train, you get to work hard, and over time, you get to see your efforts rewarded as you just continually grind out more and more progress. When you know how to train, you can continue to see results continually. Obviously, not at the same rate. Results slow down significantly after the first few years of training, but you can continue to make improvements, even if slower ones, over time. And as a result, you can continue to see progress even after, again, in my case, 14 years of serious training. I just actively enjoy training a lot, and so I'm not a person who needs a lot of motivation. I actually need motivation to do something else. Like, I just really like doing it. It's kind of the default state for me because I've just been doing it for so long. The habits are so ingrained that it's just such a natural part of my lifestyle. However, a lot of people do struggle with motivation, and it's very different from person to person. It's very different from circumstance to circumstance. And the most important myth to break, first of all, is that a lot of people think that it has a lot to do with willpower or sort of mental strength or whatever you call it, when the reality is that that is very rarely the case. That has almost nothing to do with it. So I wanted to cover a few of these major circumstances that can cause problems, and I wanted to talk over some of the methods that I recommend for dealing with those problems so that hopefully you can find a solution to whatever it is that you are struggling with in getting to the gym yourself. So one of the very big ones is simply frustrated by lack of progress / not knowing how to train. This is very common for beginners. Obviously, if you go to the gym and you don't really know what a good program looks like, you don't really know how to train to get optimal results, very often what can happen is that you just spend a lot of time spinning your wheels. And of course, when you do that, you're going to be frustrated. You're going to likely end up falling off simply because, you're not having a good time. That's a really terrible experience for anybody. It's like, showing up to a job where no one trains you on how to do the job, and you're given no guidance or support whatsoever, and then you just kind of quit because you don't know how to do what you're supposed to be doing. That's exactly what it's like when you are a beginner who doesn't really have any background in terms of understanding how to train. In this case, you have a couple of options ahead of you. So the first one is simply to follow all of the actually good sources of training information out there. And that involves a long process of reading, learning, just absorbing information, adding little bits and pieces together over the years until you've got an understanding of how to actually train. That involves following folks like myself, the folks at Stronger by Science, the folks at Renaissance Periodization, any of those more evidence-based sources of information out there, as opposed to just all of the random fitness influencers and whatnot that you have out there that are just going to disseminate really garbage info at the end of the day. This obviously takes a lot of time, and it's not really for everybody. Not everybody can spend a ton of time learning about a new hobby. That's just, for over the course of years. Like, it's just not practical or doable for a lot of people. And so the shortcut, of course, is simply to hire a coach or a trainer who will then guide you along in that process. Obviously, this also costs a lot of money, but it is obviously the fastest solution for a lot of folks, and it is a time-honored tradition. When you talk about, for example, Olympic athletes, they don't get to where they are specifically because they have great genetics and just kind of hammer it out in the gym and see what happens. No, they get access to great trainers and great coaches from around the world so that they can develop into the best athlete that they can. Another major problem circumstance that I find is that folks are frustrated by training too hard and basically not getting results. Like, they're putting in a ton of effort, but they don't feel like they are really seeing results. And this can be, in some cases, related to that first circumstance that I just discussed. It could just be that they don't really know how to train and therefore are training, a little bit suboptimally, and they're just putting in a lot of effort. And as a result, they're putting in so much effort, but it's kind of going to waste simply because it's, effort that's going in the wrong direction. However, what I also find is that there are a lot of folks who basically, they just think that they need to train a lot harder than they actually do. They think that they need to go all out. They think that this needs to be a no pain, no gain kind of situation, because that's just kind of the way that the culture is sort of, communicated to them. They think that that's what they're supposed to do. And the reality is actually quite different. You actually need to train in such a way that you challenge your body regularly, but you do not completely drain or exhaust it. And so very often, if you're going into the gym frequently and you're seeing that, you're having very exhausting workouts, you're feeling totally wiped out at the end of a workout, you're actually dreading going into the gym for your next workout, that's a bad sign. You really shouldn't be training that hard. And in fact, it's actually likely suboptimal for your results, because what really matters is finding that right sweet spot between challenging your body a little bit and not pushing it too hard, and then just sticking with that over a very long period of time, incrementally increasing difficulty little bit by little bit as your body gets a little bit stronger and a little bit more able to handle it, and then just doing that just forever, essentially. That's kind of the key to actually progressing. And so very often what happens is that beginners don't have a very good sense of where that sweet spot is. They either train way too easy or they train way too hard. And of course, when you're a beginner, maybe training, on the side of erring a little bit on the side of training too hard is maybe a little bit better than training too easy, but both of them are suboptimal. Neither of them are good. Neither of them are what you want to be accomplishing. And over time, what tends to happen is that folks, they spend more time, they get a better sense of their bodies and their limitations. And as a result, they get to the point where they now understand, okay, this is exactly where my sweet spot is, and that is how I should be training. And then they go forward from there. So in these cases, I say, if you're finding that it's way too hard, take it slower. Deload, use a method like RPE, or ratings of perceived exertion. You can look that up. Basically, Mike Teixeira's website, Reactive Training Systems, is incredibly helpful, and they have got a lot of basic guides on how to understand RPE and use it in your training. That is essentially a method in which you are using a way to measure the level of effort in each training session, and then you are using that to guide how much you're training. And when you're training and everything is an RPE 9 or 10, meaning that it's basically an all-out effort, then you need to learn to, okay, let's pull back, let's train it at a 7 or an 8 instead, and let's just focus on going from there. So that is a very useful tool that can help people to think a bit more critically and a bit more mindfully about their lifting, and as a result, get a better understanding of where their limits are. Another major circumstance is that a gym space is not accessible or welcoming. Very often, depending on where you live, a gym may be very far away, it may not have the kinds of equipment that you want, it may not be supportive, it may not be a very friendly or welcoming environment. And this is very often the case for women, for trans folk, who really struggle to find a gym that really fits them and where they feel like they will fit in, while at the same time having sort of the kinds of equipment that they want and being able to actually train. In these cases, sometimes it just takes a little bit more research. Sometimes you do need to just look around a little bit more, Google, explore, see if you can find other gyms that may be a better fit for you, that are closer or whatever the case is. It may also help often to find gyms that are located close to your work, because of course, basically the two things, you're going to be at home, you're going to be at work, and as long as you are having a gym that is close to one of those two locations, or any other location that you visit pretty frequently, then you'll have, okay, I'm already most of the way there, that's easy, I can get to the gym. It is always a lot harder, of course, if the gym is a lot further away from a location that you spend a lot of time at. That's just all that there is to it. I also recommend actually talking to the people that run the gym that you go to. Very often what can happen is that gyms will offer some kind of onboarding session or some kind of like, hey, let me show you around the equipment. And not all gyms do, but if they do, that can be a really helpful way to just get an understanding of everything, just get acquainted with everything. And that can go a long way towards making the gym a lot more welcoming for you. If it is ultimately the case that you simply do not jive well with any of the gyms in your area, that is not a problem either. It is actually generally a lot cheaper to assemble a home gym than a lot of people think. Obviously, you do need a little bit of space, and not everyone has a ton of space, but the reality is that you don't need a ton of space either, so long as you can fit a bench, so long as you can fit a pair of quick change dumbbells somewhere in your house or apartment, then chances are that you've got a place that you can do a pretty serious workout in regardless. The cost of a pair of quick change dumbbells and a bench is pretty comparable to what you would see in basically like a year's worth of gym membership fees, and they'll save you a lot more money over the long term simply because you're not going to be paying those gym membership fees year after year after year. They will last you forever, and they don't necessarily require a ton of space. Then, of course, if you want to get more serious and you have more space, you can do something like get yourself a squat rack, get yourself a barbell and some plates, and with some dumbbells and some barbells, basically you can do pretty much everything that you'd ever really need to do. You wouldn't really need to get a gym membership at that point. That's more expensive, but it could still very easily be worth it to you because, again, of course, it'll save you so much money in the long run that you're not going into gyms. For cardio, you can do things like you can do step aerobics in your house in front of your TV. You may be able to go for walks or runs in your neighborhood. Very often, you do not need a ton of equipment for that either. So very often, if the problem is that you don't have a gym that works out well for you, the answer is simply that you can make your own gym. Another major problem that I hear a lot is simply what I would call lifestyle management or lack of time. People just say, hey, I'm too busy. I don't really have time to get in workouts all the time. And I think that that's very often not the case. I'm not going to say that that's always not the case. There are certainly a lot of people who are very busy, who work very long hours, and they very often struggle. At the same time, I know personally that throughout all the phases of my life, even though I was working in many cases 60 plus hours a week, and I was often very exhausted after doing so, I would still actually just drag myself to the gym and get in just a basic workout. Obviously, I didn't push myself as hard. Obviously, my results were a little bit, less during those phases of my life. But the reality is that very often we can make time. We can find time elsewhere. And the reality is that very often we let a lot of these little things just take over our lives. Little things like spending all day scrolling social media, or just wasting time shuffling our feet, not doing the things that we really need to do. And so it can very often help to just take a little bit more mindful approach to managing your schedule, be a little bit more careful about setting timers to make sure that you're actually doing things at the right time. If your schedule isn't set up in a way that says, hey, I've already got an hour blocked out for working out, then you're not going to find a time to fit it in. That's just kind of how it is. It helps to do things like set a regular recurring timer on your phone that goes off, hey, 6 p.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, reminder, do your workout now. And that can go a long way towards being like, oh yeah, I do actually have this planned. I do actually have time for this. I can actually do it. Likewise, finding some kind of social support, maybe a supportive spouse or partner, maybe a coach, those can also go a long way towards keeping you on track and making sure that you're actually going to get in those workouts because you feel that social pressure, as opposed to just, turning it into another day where you're like, I just don't feel like doing it today, so I'm just not going to. Very often as well, things like group classes can help a lot because you have that social support in that as well. And this is the one thing that I tell people all the time that CrossFit does actually really well, is that CrossFit has really, really, really well harnessed that sense of community and using that to help keep people on track. And so if you can find a good CrossFit gym, that also tends to be very helpful. And that is why CrossFit has the reputation that it does, that it is almost cult-like because people get so excited about it. Another major problem circumstance that I see a lot of the time is people who do not have serious athletic goals trying to act like they are an athlete. And this is maybe not something that is easy to understand for the average person, but the reality is that when you look at a lot of the programs out there, they're not really designed with your general average exerciser in mind. Like if you look up on the internet, like, oh, what does a size-focused program look like? What does a strength-focused program look like? In general, these are going to be geared a little bit more like they are towards an athlete than they are towards a general population exerciser, because that's just kind of, like the kinds of folk who tend to do those programs. That just is how it is. And so when you're trying to copy those programs or do those programs, you are subconsciously trying to act like an athlete in the process. And the reality is that you don't need to train like an athlete to see serious benefits to your health, to see serious benefits to your strength and muscle mass over time, so long as you just stick with something basic and keep doing it. And so what I tell folks all the time is that there is no shame in working out 2 or 3 days a week. There is no shame in doing 2 to 3 short half-hour long workouts, getting into the gym, getting out and moving on with your life. There's nothing wrong with that. There has been a lot of research recently that just shows that, even a very minimum dose of exercise can go a really long way over a long period of time, so long as you are actually sticking with it. So if the choice is between not actually working out and working out twice a week for half an hour each time, that twice a week, half an hour each time is going to give you massively better results. It's going to give you such amazing results compared to doing nothing that it's well worth the time invested. And so you can very, very easily do a very minimalistic program that does not require a lot of time to work out in the gym. You can get the results that you're looking for. Now, I do also tell people a lot that that very often a misconception is that weight loss is basically a sort of average exerciser kind of goal. It's not. It is really an athletic goal. It is really something that bodybuilders do intentionally and purposefully, and it is a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging than simply working out to work out. And so I tell people all the time, weight loss is not necessarily a good goal for a beginner to pick up, because it's kind of really more of an advanced project if you're going to do it right, and if you're going to do it in a way that is not going to be damaging to your body and your mental health in the long term. So I do not recommend weight loss for most people. It's simply not useful in many cases. In general, you want to focus on just your major barbell movements, your squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, and row, and you want to avoid doing a ton of the accessory exercises, arm training, calf training, and so on, that you see a lot in bodybuilding style programs, but are basically going to be they're not going to give you any use at all. Like, they're not going to be useful to you as the average exerciser. You're going to get a lot better results for your arms simply out of bench pressing, overhead pressing, and rowing. And, you know, it's just a huge waste of time to do a ton of bicep curls or whatever the case is, because you think it'll add the tiniest little extra fragment onto your biceps and that you'll look better. You know, it's just not the case. So it's just not worth it for most people to do a ton of these accessory exercises, which just gets you smaller results overall compared to just training on the major compound barbell movements. Again, fast workouts, get in, get out, move on with your life, be done with it. Another problem that a lot of people have, another problem situation for a lot of people, is that they just don't find training fun. And again, this happens a lot when you have folks who are maybe, you know, very low intrinsic motivation. They just don't like working out. And that's fine too. Like, you don't have to love working out. You know, like, I love working out. And even then, of course, I have days where I'm just like, oh, God, I want this to be over already. You know, loving working out is not necessarily ever going to be the case. It's not necessarily the goal for anybody. However, the idea is that, you know, if you hate working out, chances are that the reality is that you only hate some very particular aspect of working out because you have not really tried all of the options. I think that a lot of people, you know, they go to the gym and they're like, okay, what do I do? And they spend some time, you know, fiddling around on the treadmill. They spend some time, you know, fiddling around on the machines. They sweat. They don't enjoy it. They're not really seeing results. And again, this is tied into that first thing again, where if people don't really know how to exercise to get the results they want, then they're very likely just going to get frustrated. They're not going to enjoy working out, period. So it could just be, again, that first option, you just don't really know how to work out. But very, very often what happens is that people just haven't tried all of the options available to them. And what tends to happen is that if you try a lot more different kinds of exercise, you tend to find something that works out for you. I had a client who came to me because he wanted to lose weight. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he just wasn't really willing to make the diet changes that were required for that. And what we ended up doing was transitioning him into doing powerlifting, because he realized that he loved powerlifting and it didn't require him to lose weight. It didn't require him to change his diet, and he could continue to get stronger and really enjoy that, you know, without having to do all that stuff about exercising that he didn't like. And likewise, for example, I had a client who, you know, she tried working out with me for a while. It just really ultimately wasn't clicking with her. But because she started working out with me, she ended up discovering that she really liked yoga. She got really into yoga. She ended up becoming a yoga instructor at the end of the day, and that became a huge factor in her life as well. So the reality is that, again, there's no one size fits all. Some people, for example, myself, I used to be a cross-country runner in high school. I hated it, and then I discovered lifting, and I was like, this is awesome, you know? Like, I love lifting. I'm definitely not an endurance-focused exerciser, and that's just who I am. So very often what tends to happen is that when you try a lot more modalities, when you try other kinds of exercise, you tend to discover that there is actually one that you really like. And when you find that, then you want to stick with that. You don't want to do anything else, you know? Like, that is the kind of exercise that's best for you. So, you know, I just recommend, like, people, you know, have an open mind, try out some more kinds of exercise, see if you can find the one that you like, because obviously there's no point in trying to hammer it out with, you know, a kind of exercise that you hate. And, you know, it's just going to be a much better experience for you in the long run if you can find those aspects of exercise that you do enjoy. So I hope that this video has helped you find a way to make exercise more fun and sustainable for you. I would just, closing comments, I would just say that most people would benefit from working out less. They would benefit from working out more consistently, and they would just benefit from having a slightly better structured program. And of course, again, not doing a one size fits all. Hey, you know, just run on the treadmill forever, because no one enjoys that, except of course distance runners, and distance runners are not everybody, certainly not me. So as always, if you liked the video, don't hesitate to comment, subscribe, tell me what you want to see in future videos. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one. Bye.